if that 538 forecast of a 0.1% advantage for Republicans in the midterms comes to be, you're going to have a Speaker Kevin McCarthy. And if we can put up B1 here, Emily Jasinski has a profile of Kevin McCarthy, just ran in the Federalist. So, tell us what was your impression of Kevin McCarthy?
I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on with Kevin McCarthy. Remember, he is he's a young gun, right? Remember that hilarious photo shoot and book with Eric Cantor, Paul Ryan, and Kevin McCarthy.
That was incredible.
From 2010 or 2011. It looks like a Men's Warehouse ad. And so he sort of came up under Boehner, under Ryan, very much an establishment fixture, who is now on really good terms with Jim Jordan. He is now on really good terms with basically the entire Freedom Caucus. He's on decent terms with Donald Trump. And so here's this question of how did this establishment fixture navigate the Trump era in a way where he emerges as the last young gun standing? He's the one that managed to actually have really good relationships with people like Jim Jordan, Donald Trump, while also having good relationships with the establishment, continuing to have a good relationship with the establishment. It's an interesting question, and it's not to say that Kevin McCarthy is brilliant or dumb, although Politico ran a piece earlier this year asking, is Kevin McCarthy a dummy, a giant dummy?
Is he a dummy?
No, he's not. And I think that's really what's interesting here is that he's very savvy and he's such a people person that the Republican caucus feels very heard by him, which goes a long way when you need to sort of unite people and get all of their votes for Speaker. So all that is to say, we are likely to see a Speaker Kevin McCarthy. In the story, I have a Freedom Caucus source basically saying that is not done and dusted, is what he says. Politico also had a piece saying Kevin McCarthy, Freedom Caucus is totally behind him. I don't think that's the case, but I think he's going to have to make some concessions. In the story, Rachel Bovard talks about how Nancy Pelosi basically blew up a lot of precedents, and by her own admission. She said we had to blow up those precedents essentially to deal with the threat of Trumpism, to deal with the threat of the insurrection, et cetera, et cetera. So that means Republicans want Kevin McCarthy to fight fire with fire. He's going to boot Adam Schiff, Eric Swalwell from the Intelligence Committee. He's going to boot Ilhan Omar from Foreign Affairs if he is Speaker, if Republicans win. He's not ready to talk about impeachment yet. That's one thing that has a lot of people on the right kind of riled up. They wish he would come out guns a-blazing and go for Mayorkas, go for Merrick Garland. He says he'll do it if something occasions impeachment. But he's really walking a tightrope, and he could slip and fall at any moment, but he's been doing this for years, and I think it's worth paying attention to.
What do they want to do Garland for? The letter about the parents in Virginia?
Well, to start with that. Yeah, and then
really
all of the other FBI,
FBI
corruption.
stuff.
Yeah, okay. Generally it would all come down to FBI corruption.
Gotcha. You had an interesting anecdote about Jim Jordan because it is, and I think that a lot of liberals have not picked up on the fact that Kevin McCarthy has really ingratiated himself with the right. And so they keep thinking, oh, he's not going to be able to handle the right. It's like, no, actually, if you follow the caucus or the conference, it's so annoying. It's a Democratic caucus and a Republican conference. The Republicans in the House call themselves a conference. Democrats are a caucus, and actually
I call them a caucus too, though.
There's actually supposed to be a meaningful distinction between the two. A caucus is supposed to vote together, where a conference is like people who are conferring, right, but are still individuals. But they're not actually. They're a caucus now. So let's call them a caucus. So the Republican caucus is actually pretty united behind Kevin McCarthy. It seems at this point, as Rachel said in your piece, the Freedom Caucus doesn't really have the juice to take him out. You had this interesting anecdote about Jim Jordan and how he kind of jammed him onto the Oversight Committee against the wishes of the committee. How do you do that, and what's been the fallout from that?
Yeah, there hasn't been fallout, which is what's so interesting. It's like he tells the story about how after Jim Jordan ran against him for Speaker, he said he called Jordan up. I think they were freshman congressmen together. He called Jordan up. Jordan was working out at the gym, and Kevin McCarthy said, listen, you got to get down here. I need you to be oversight chair. You're the best person for the job.
Look, it's work hours. What are you doing?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what was in the I don't know what hours the steering committee keeps. So, but Jordan comes down and gives his presentation to the Oversight Committee, or to the steering committee, and they erupt, is what Kevin McCarthy said. The steering committee erupted
in a negative way.
On Kevin McCarthy for bringing Jordan in. McCarthy says, you elected me to lead. let me lead, sticks his neck out for Jordan. Jordan does what, just by all accounts, everybody's on the right believes was a great job in oversight. And Kevin McCarthy sees that as a real success point. And Jim Jordan is really his bridge to the Freedom Caucus. But as we talked about with Ken Buck earlier this week, it's possible that bridge could break if the Freedom Caucus gets annoyed enough with Jordan over their disagreements on big tech stuff. Who knows if that happens, but it's another thing to watch out for. But yeah, I mean, Kevin McCarthy has been very intentional. He is not Paul Ryan. He is surely not John Boehner. And that's an interesting point that you raised about how on the left, I don't think people recognize how sincere, it's another story from the piece, which very quickly Jim Jordan talks about, and Kevin McCarthy talks about how that first impeachment of Donald Trump, they did not lose a Republican vote. And they've lost Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney on January 6th stuff, but that's pretty remarkable given where we know Republicans are sort of behind closed doors when it comes to Donald Trump, right?
And also when it comes to sending weapons to Ukraine and national security behind closed doors,
exactly.
Which was what that impeachment was about.
Exactly. And so for him to be able to do that was a feat. And Jim Jordan talks about how that really brought the conference together. McCarthy saw that as a moment that really brought the conference together. The way I described it, it's like when you're on a high school field trip, like maybe you're going somewhere big and fancy and something goes really wrong on the trip and everyone becomes best friends because it's like trauma bonding. That's basically how Republicans would describe their experience with the first impeachment and keeping everybody together. And that is strategically a testament to McCarthy's leadership. Now, to your point, Ryan, he had some interesting comments this week to Punchbowl, where he said, we're basically not going to be giving a blank check to Ukraine in January because people are seeing a recession. They're going through a recession. They're dealing with high levels of inflation. What they're not going to want to see from us is a blank check to Ukraine. This gets blown up into a whole thing about how Republicans are now this like isolationist, Jacksonian party. But what did you make of McCarthy weighing in on Ukraine, especially with the news that you wanted to discuss briefly about Kherson?
Oh, right. So there isn't a development yet on this incoming battle of Kherson, but the Ukrainian government has now kind of put a blackout around all of their operations around the Kherson region, and they're telegraphing that there's going to be a major assault on Kherson in the next several days. Could start today, as far as we know. It's running along the same pattern that as we saw with the assault on the Eastern Front. What was that, a month ago or so? Kherson is the only kind of regional capital that Russia was able to take. Putin has declared martial law there. He has illegally annexed the region, and if it falls so quickly after that, it'll be a huge blow to Putin. And the authorities who are currently controlling Kherson have urged all civilians to evacuate so that they can fortify the city, bracing for this coming assault. And so it does feel like this could be a battle that tells you where this is heading. Mm-hmm. That if they get repulsed and then they head into a winter with most of their power stations out, and with Europe growing sick of their own kind of travails at the expense of this war. Yeah. And if you have McCarthy right, take power in January, Putin may feel like, okay, I've got this. If I can just hold on, I've got this. If they take Kherson, then the rest of the war seems foretold in a way.
Tell me more about that.
That from there, I could just see everything just collapsing.
Dominoes.
Yeah, I mean, because if they can't hold the most significant piece that they grabbed,
right,
then what? Then you keep saying, well, you see kind of supporters of the Russian war effort saying, don't dismiss this war. They seized 30% of territory, and they still hold 20% of territory, and then they're gonna be like, well, they hold 18% of, they hold 15%, they hold 10% of Ukrainian territory, and at that point you're like, morale is so important that you can, if you see which direction things are going, then you could imagine these different these different fortifications just saying, you know what, I'm not here for this.
Well, and on this point, a really interesting, this is from Morning Consult, which says they're tracking, quote, shows the share of Republicans who say the U.S. is doing too much to halt Russia's invasion of Ukraine has doubled from 13% to 27%.
So 27% of people say the U.S. is doing too much.
That was from March to May. So those are somewhat outdated numbers, but you can see that doubling really quickly. And that's very, very interesting. And that's where you start to see this creeping into Republican rhetoric and perhaps into Republican policy. Now, Mitch McConnell is very hawkish and is all in on sending a lot of money to Ukraine. Obviously, if Ukraine is able to have a bulwark militarily, that's coming from heavily coming from U.S. funding. And so it's heavily reliant on their ability to have Mitch McConnell persuade, a Republican Party or a Kevin McCarthy to be on board with that. And to your point, Ryan, one thing I always see happening in Washington is you can always make the case for the next step, the next spending, the next increment, and the next bill, because this is about Kherson. And if Kherson goes, then you have a domino effect. And that's something the Republicans are going to have to deal with, I think.
Or they might not, because I could see a scenario where in the lame duck, let's say Republicans have taken over both chambers or they took over just the House. I could see in the lame duck Pelosi on her way out sitting down with Schumer and McConnell and saying, here come the crazies, like, let's write a blank check. Well, or not necessarily a blank check, but how about another $50 billion? Like that should get it. Or another $100 billion. We're not going to spend it all, but here's $100 billion that's available. I could absolutely see that happening. And all it has to do is get through the House. And then once it gets to the Senate, like you said, McConnell and enough Republicans, you've got people like Portman and Blunt and other retiring Republicans, that breezes through. And then McCarthy can say he's not going to send any more money. It won't matter, which actually probably would be his preference. Like if you could, if you could speak to him completely privately about it, he probably wants to send money there, but doesn't want his fingerprints on the money. Because if you notice, he said
special interests want us to spend money in Ukraine.
And so do a lot of the hawkish donors in the Republican Party that are left. The base doesn't necessarily want it, but a lot of the donors
that may be changing. But you're right.
Some of that, right? Some do, some don't. But you notice his phrasing. He said, we're not going to send a blank check. That's different than saying we're not going to send money.
We're not going to send a check is a different.
We'll send a check, and it is shameful that that there have not been strings attached, that there has not been oversight put on this money. We're going to see these weapons, all over the world, and you're going to see enormous amounts of it skimmed. You're also obviously seeing enormous amounts of it fired at the Russian military and at their positions. So it's not as if nothing's being done with the weapons. But so McCarthy, I think, would still sign off on significant military aid, but there would be like money for the IG.
There's basically evidence that there are cracks in the foundation that really has not had cracks in it. Pat Buchanan, I don't think, really put cracks in it, but maybe tiny little hairline fractures that are now opening up into cracks in the sort of neoconservative foundation of the Republican Party.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.